Inner Voice, a heartfelt chat with Dr. Foojan.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Inner Voice podcast. It is so great to be with you today. I'm Dr. Foojan Zeine, a psychotherapist, author, and the originator of the awareness integration theory. Our conversations here are about what matters most in our life: our minds, our thoughts, feelings, actions, relationships, and our fulfillment in this beautiful journey of life. I want to share with you the good news, which is my book, Intentional Parenting, which I have written with two of my wonderful colleagues. It's Intentional Parenting, a practical guide to awareness integration theory, which we wrote with Dr. Nicole Jaffari and Dr. Eileen Manoukian, both scholars. I've done a lot of research working with children, and we took the practicality of the awareness integration and we took it age by age, which means that we have taken this book and went to infancy, toddler, school age, teens, preteens, and even your young adults who might still be in your home. So it gives you cognitive concepts and developmental concepts and emotional regulation and how to parent. So whether you're a parent or you are an educator or you are a teacher, a therapist, all of that would really help you to get better understanding of how to parent in a way that makes it easier for you and your kids. And for all of the therapists who are out there and life coaches who are wanting to work with your clients from this perspective, please get the book, Awareness Integration Theory, Clear the Past, Create a New Future, and Live a Fulfilled Life. It was forwarded by my favorite Dr. Jeffrey Zeig, and Dr. Philip Zimbardo has written it. So I'm very excited about this book, and I'm positive that it would support you if you are a therapist or a coach and really want to work with your clients from this perspective. We're actually certifying therapists and coaches, so let me know if that's something you like to do. In this episode, I am so excited to chat with Dr. Ronald Alexander. He is a psychotherapist, a mindfulness trainer, and a creativity, business, and leadership coach. He has a private psychotherapy and executive coach practice in Santa Monica, California. He's the executive director of the Open Mind Training program that offers personal and professional training programs in mindfulness-based mind-body therapies and transformational leadership and meditation. He is the author of the highly acclaimed book, Wise Mind, Open Mind, Finding Purpose and Meaning in Times of Crisis, Loss, and Change. And we're going to talk about his new book, Core Creativity, the mindful way to unlock your creative self. You can find him at corecreation.com. I had a blast. I really enjoyed our conversation, really enjoyed the book. It has systematically teaches you how to do meditation and guided visualization in different areas. And it's awesome. I really enjoyed my conversation with him, and I hope you do as much as I did. Subscribe to my podcast, to my YouTube channel, and connect with me. Tell your friends about this podcast and connect with me through my website, foojanzeine.com, or any of the social media. For any of you wonderful listeners and viewers, if you want to do the work on yourself, take on the awareness integration and do it as a self-help book, get my life reset. And it is the awareness integration path to creating the life you want. You can get that from Amazon. We've done research in many of the universities, and we found that just by even doing the book, Life Reset, you can raise your self-esteem and confidence and bring down your depression about 76% and anxiety about 64%. I'm excited about all that you could do with the awareness integration. So without further ado, remember, I love to hear from you, so let me know. Without further ado, I am excited to bring you the one and only Dr. Ronald Alexander. Here he is. Dr. Ronald Alexander, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. Pleasure to be here.
It is so nice to have you here with us. Today, we're going to talk about your latest book, Core Creativity, The Mindful Way to Unlock Your Creative Self. I love this book in a way that every chapter has either one or two or more guided imagery and meditation path, where you could take everyone systematically toward any of the topics that is really matters for them, and you have different topics that you go through the meditation. So it's very practical for everyone who's with us and can get the book. It is such a practical, not only has the theory, not only tells you why you need to do what you need to do, but it actually has specific ways that you can practice as you go through it. So what got you to want to write this book for us?
Well, my colleagues have been asking me for the last 40 years, when am I going to write the book on creativity and mindfulness? And so it's been a subspecialty of mine since I began consulting and coaching in the television, film, music, in the .com computer industry since I was 30. And so that's like 30s, 40s, 50s, 4 decades. It's been in the making.
Beautiful. So you talk about core creativity. Can we first talk about what do you mean by core creativity? How is that different than regular creativity?
Well, core creativity is when you step out of your lane. You think differently. You begin to image and connect to the intuitive self. And in core creativity, there are 3 ways for downloading. One is you download from the top down, meaning the collective or the universal consciousness. And throughout history, musicians, philosophers, poets, great writers, thinkers, oftentimes talk about being opened to a portal of creativity where, for example, Mozart and Beethoven. A little later, I can talk about how Paul McCartney downloaded the song, his masterpiece, Yesterday. But just take Beethoven and Mozart, is they experienced the symphonies in their entirety as if it was being downloaded. Oftentimes they would say from the divine or from the ecstatic or celestial music itself. So there's the download of core creativity. And then another avenue or portal for experiencing core creativity is what I call the nurturing upload from the ground up. And many of the notables that I interviewed for the book often talked about the importance of immersing themselves in nature, taking the daily walk. And some of them would even walk with bare feet. Others would just get out into nature and feel that these new ideas, profound images, fine artists, painters I interviewed, talked about when they take a walk in nature, they start to feel the painting starting to come up from nature or from the ground itself. And then the third distinction of core creativity is what I called an inload. And that's when you go inside and you tap into what I call the user-friendly creative unconscious. And that's a part of our unconscious mind or our unconscious experience where information, data, designs, and imagery, it comes and it unfolds mainly from both the gut and from the heart center or the heart chakra, for those who are familiar with the yogic systems. So the inload is it comes literally from a sensory felt experience. Many great painters like Mark Rothko, Jackson Pollock, John Basquiat, they often talked about that they would experience the painting in their somatic sense of self first, and then it would come forward. So that's how I define core creativity. And the major distinction between regular creativity is just it's the breakthrough to a new idea, like the big idea, or a new way of writing or composing music, or invention. Take, for example, how did we come from the creative perspective to develop the iPhone, the first smartphone? Well, Steve Jobs used to get on his plane with his family and take 6 or 7 what he called lousy, crappy portable CD players, because he loved to listen to music on the flight from San Francisco over to Kyoto. And he was always throwing them on the ground in the plane, ripping them apart, because they never quite worked with any sophistication. And on one trip, he looks in the palm of his hand and he goes, what would it be like to invent a device that I could hold in the palm of my hand, and it would have my entire record, CD, and tape collection on? And that, when he got together with the inventor, Jonathan Ive at Apple, the British guy, came the first iPod. And from the first iPod, which he took out of his little front pocket and said, just one more thing, it held 1,000 downloadable songs. And that began to be the first predecessor to what came to be the iPhone, which was this extraordinary core creative device that included not only music, but it included surfing the internet, being able to do your email, being able to interact with apps, and on and on and on. So the core creative approach helps people to get beyond their normal, ordinary, conscious mind, and to suspend that and to drop into those, receiving those downloads, those uploads, or the intuitive inload.
You say in your book, creativity involves reassembling what already exists, putting together ideas that haven't been combined before. It also involves perceiving differently instead of from a default perspective. This feels so great to me, because I created a psychology model, which is exactly involving reassembling a lot of the theories and perspectives that were there and putting them together that creates something else. The same thing you were talking about music or things that we already know, but someone either downloads, uploads, or goes inside and sees a different manifestation of what already exists that comes through the person, and then it manifests itself outside.
Yes. And the whole concept of taking sometimes what already exists and being creative to either reassemble it or reimagine and build onto what already exists. Take, for example, in psychology, we had in the 60s the invention of Gestalt therapy by Fritz Perls. And Fritz Perls, he studied psychoanalysis. He was a medical doctor and had some time with Freud. And then he was very much interested in directing and acting. And so he studied with the great European director Stanislavski. And so then he goes to South Africa with his wife, Laura, and they put their thinking caps on, and they decide, what would it be like to take everything that we know from psychoanalysis, but make it a here and now therapy? Instead of a therapy that's focused on people's past, we bring it into the moment. And then they went off to Japan, and also Tokyo, Kyoto, and Osaka, and they studied Zen meditation, which was all about coming into the moment, being into the moment. Lose your mind and come into your sensations was one of the pillars of Gestalt therapy. And another important facet that I describe in my book called Creativity is mindfulness meditation, which also is a here and now meditation that focuses that in every now, there's a moment, and then there's a next moment. So the now is constantly shifting to the next moment, to the next now. And so they took the concepts from Zen meditation, from Gestalt, Lewin's field theory, from psychoanalysis, and they recontextualized it all, and they cut out what was no longer useful or helpful, and they synthesized it all together like, cooking a great soup, and then served it up as this pristine new form of Gestalt therapy. And at first, they were going to actually call it concentration therapy because it was so focused on combining Zen meditation in a here and now approach to psychotherapy. But then the group of thinkers like Isidore Fromm and Paul Goodman in New York City, they said, well, it's kind of clunky concentration therapy. Let's come up with something unusual. And so they spent many, many months to receive, which I call in the first stage of how do you enter core creativity. Well, the first stage in my book, I talk about you enter into absorbing mind. And so you have to absorb music and film and art and look at picture books and photography. And in that state of absorbing, they came up with the word Gestalt, which in German means whole. Mind, body, and then energy body. So Gestalt therapy, which is an absolutely unique and new form and a new invention of therapy, but it has a history. And what all they had to do was take from here and take from there and reassemble it. So it's really important to pay homage to that. Sometimes you're going to get, like Freud did, psychoanalysis, and that's just going to come right down, or guided imagery therapy. And other times, what we need to do is we need to pay homage to and respect on what's already in front of us, what's already been thought up a bit. And then it's our task or job to take it to the next level. Now, musicians know this. Many of the musicians I interviewed over the years, oftentimes they have two pathways to accessing core creativity. In the first part of my book, I talk about a guitarist who he takes his guitar in the morning after he does his meditation, he goes into his home studio and he runs his fingers across the strings. Now he's not playing, he's just absorbing, he's waiting. That's right. Yeah, just exactly what you did, that sensory experience. And he's waiting, he says, for the guitar to speak to him. Now that's a metaphor because, as we know, guitars don't talk. But when you're playing a guitar, and when I used to play, you can make a guitar talk. You can make it sing. You can make it scream. And so musicians oftentimes, they go into a zone of sensory connectivity where they actually use their sensory feelers and they spend time touching their instrument. Another notable that I didn't interview, but I had the wonderful pleasure to get to know, was a very renowned drummer. And he told me he runs his fingers across the skins of his drums and he awaits them to tell him what to write or how to play. And that's just such a beautiful, wonderful metaphor for the need to come out of your mind and to come into your sensations with an instrument. Now, the second portal, though, of core creativity, that's the portal of the gifted. And one of the good things about my book, and you had mentioned kindly that I have lots of guided meditations and visualizations to teach those of us who have ordinary creativity, meaning that every person is born with the capacity to be a creative and to unlock that creativity and to apply it, to manifest it in their everyday life. Then there's a whole class, as we know, of very blessed. And many of the creatives that I interviewed would oftentimes say to me, well, my creativity as a musician, yes, I've worked very hard. Let's not forget the 250,000 hours that I've worked at my guitar or at the keyboards. But I was blessed. I know I was born into a musical family. I have a sense that when I first started to play music, that I could play any instrument and listen to a song and play it 5 minutes later by ear. That's in a realm of what I call the gifted and the sacred. And that's, of course, a portal that we should all aspire towards, but we shouldn't put ourselves down or get discouraged if, like Paul McCartney.
Yeah, we can't expect it. If it's there, it's beautiful. And if not, we could, what you also say in your book is that there are habits that we could create, that rituals that we could create in order to tap into any of these three forms. But if it was one of those genius ways or innate ways that it was there, what a beauty.
Yeah, Bob Dylan was quoted in 1988 meeting up for an afternoon with Paul McCartney. And he was quoted as saying, Paul is unlike anybody that I've ever come across that I pay homage towards. He can do it all: write, sing, play every single instrument. We oftentimes think of Paul McCartney as, well, he was the bass player in the Beatles. What we forget is he was only the bass player because they needed a bass player. He could play lead guitar as well as George Harrison could play in rhythm guitar as John Lennon. And he could play the drums very, very well, not as well as Ringo. Nobody's like him. But those kind of cats, they live in a domain of what's called the sacred when it comes to creativity. There's clearly a gift. But what's also important, that is very applicable to those of us that want to perfect and fulfill our own creativity, is, as Leonard Cohen said, and let's not forget about the 10,000 hours that I spent perfecting my craft.
Yes. Yes. You talked about Gestalt, and in your book, you also talk about another, let's say, download that it could be maybe all three of them, the upload, the download, and the inner, when it shows up in dreams. And you beautifully explain how, from a Gestalt perspective, you can also look at your dreams and see how much the inner part of you is coming up and showing you your subconscious creativity as it brings it into your consciousness as you choose to look at it.
I'm really glad that you brought up dreams, because we're talking about Paul McCartney, his masterpiece, right? Clearly a core creative download. He dreamt it.
Yeah.
And he wakes up, he writes it down. He had a little tape recorder, spoke into it, awakens in the morning, and I think he was with his girlfriend at the time in his flat in London, and he closes his eyes, and his first thought is, oh my God, I think I just dreamt this extraordinary song. What was it? And he gets up and he realizes that, because he had a habit of keeping a tape recorder and also a writing notebook by his bed. Well, dreams, Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud both said the royal road. Freud said it's the royal road to the unconscious. Carl Jung said it's the dream is the royal road to the collective and the universal unconscious, in addition to our own personal unconscious. And so, for example, when I was a young man studying in Amherst, Massachusetts, I was trying to make a decision. Do I go to an East Coast university for my advanced degrees, or do I go to a West Coast university? And so my therapist at the time, who he and I did a lot of dream work. He said, well, why don't you run? Why don't you dream about it this week? And I had this dream where I was sitting in a covered wagon, an old-fashioned covered wagon with horses. And there was another figure, which I think was symbolic of just my unconscious, sitting shotgun. And I was crossing up over the Rocky Mountains. And when you come through the Donna Pass, you can see the San Francisco Bay Area. And I saw the Golden Gate Bridge. And so I woke up and I wrote it down. And my association was, go west, young man, which was an old Western saying at the time of the gold rush. And the Golden Gate Bridge in the dream was, there's going to be gold for you if you go west. So I packed up my little Volkswagen and went off to California, and have had a very thriving and very fulfilling and creative field that came from my being in the West. So listening to what we dream about nightly is important.
I remember talking to my husband about some of the projects that he had. And one night he woke up around 3 o'clock in the morning, like jolting and sitting on bed. And in the dream, all of the patent had shown up in the software that he was going to make. And it was like, he woke up and he ran into his office starting to write everything. So in the morning, as I'm like, what happened to you? He said, by golly, I got it. And he patented, and it was beautiful. He got an award for that patent. And I remember part of the essence of the model that I created also was I was in a cruise, and I was just laying down and ordering a drink, and this the person who was serving me turned around and left, and all of these emotions showed up, and I was like flabbergasted about these emotions. Okay, you're okay. Good. All of these emotions showed up, and I was with it, and kind of like going internally, sensing and going, and then I kind of fell asleep beside the pool, and I woke up with this concept of how to go back to where we made a decision about these things and internally, and how to go from taking some of the psychological models and the trauma models and going and finding it to dismantle those core beliefs. So it's very fascinating that how there's a combination of the consciousness, the subconscious, and the collective consciousness, and the portals that we could find ourselves connecting to them in order to bring these types of innovations, creativity, and reassembling, as your word is, all of it together, and then manifesting it and bringing it out.
Yes, in both your work with open to the poles of advancing trauma, and your husband, his being able to download the software and the program, those are classic examples of modern day, the use of core creativity. And then historically, for example, when I was researching other famous notables, the writer Robert Louis Stevenson, he used to dream entire chapters in whatever he was writing at night. In both Henry Miller, Ananias Nin, and Ernest Hemingway, they always said that they had to eventually go to bed at night because they knew that their dreams were going to be giving them guidance in what they were going to be writing the following day. And so regardless of how much all three of them ever partied a lot in Paris, they got enough sleep. Most of them all got to bed by 12 and would wake up around 6 o'clock, because core creatives, they all have many, many important rituals. And a couple of the rituals, just to mention, is most all of them awaken early in the morning, and whether they are steeped in a particular Eastern form of meditation, like Buddhist mindfulness meditation or transcendental meditation, or just a very simple Zen meditation of sitting quietly, counting your breaths, noticing your breaths. Almost all the creatives that I interviewed, and many of the ones that I've read through in history, they got up very early in the morning, usually 5 or 6. And the second ritual they had is they would sit down with a good cup of coffee or tea. And then after they had their coffee and tea, they would take time to partake in some form of contemplative quietude. And again, some actually formalized it as formal meditation, where other creatives, they talk about it as spending time awaiting the download without even efforting, like without even the structure of a specialized form of meditation. But they all had in common that quiet period early in the morning, and some had it late at night, because you have to make space that not all the creatives are early morning risers. In the history of the Rolling Stones, famous rock group from England, they used to, for many decades, go in and record from 12 at night until 8 in the morning. And why is that? Well, for them, as a group, there was something about that in the night, which is a representation of the shadow, that they were able to become intimately connected, to listen to that muse and to receive the inload and the download. And so sometimes people's biorhythmic patterns for arising early or not, or staying up really late because you have the night owls, the larks are those of us that like to go to sleep early and wake up early. And the owls, it's completely opposite. The owls actually feed on this concept of no light. There's something about pulling from the darkness that brings alive their portal of the core creative download.
Yes. You also talk about how to activate witnessing self. And when you witness self, you become less emotionally reactive and then more open to obviously new experiences, because you're not caught into this web of going back and forth and getting caught. So it seems like then your venues are open in order to experience new experiences.
Yeah, very, very important term and a very important function for all of us who are very interested in receiving either the download, the inload, or the upload. And the witnessing self comes from the Buddhist schools of mindfulness meditation, where through direct and intensified focus of awareness on an object, either something like a candle or looking out at the blue sky or a tree, or an inward focused sense of awareness on your third eye, tip of the nose, or the heart center. And sometimes some people like to focus on their navel because the Dan Tian in Chinese, it means the power center. And sometimes people receive an inload from their gut. There's something about listening to your gut. And so the observing witness comes from the part of our mind that we train to, like when we're watching a play, we're sitting in the audience and we're a witness to the play. The witnessing awareness is that part of the mind that we can cultivate that begins to witness ourselves sitting in the movie or sitting in the theater, watching the play up on screen. And there's oftentimes this creative dialogue that takes place. Me being an Irishman and from Boston, the Celtics used to play in a place called the Boston Garden. And they used to joke that the reason why the Celtics would win so often and they would get so many Hail Mary jump shots from the corner was that there was an imaginary leprechaun. There was a leprechaun sitting on the basket, bringing the ball in. It's a nice fable, and it's worked for decades and decades. But the leprechaun is an archetype in Jungian psychology for the witnessing awareness. It's that little guy or girl that's sitting there saying to you, okay, yeah, take that shot. Okay, go, run with that idea. Or sometimes the little leprechaun witnessing awareness says, slow down, Ron. You're going too fast here. I think we need to sit with this over the course of days or weeks or even months until the witnessing awareness comes in and goes, okay, that chapter's perfect now. Let it go. Send it off to the editor.
Right. Yes. Everyone, Dr. Ronald Alexander, the book is Core Creativity, the Mindful Way to Unlock Your Creative Self. And Jack Kornfield says, encourages you, your gifts, and your spirit to come alive. I remember, I just wanted to share with you, I remember I was reading Jack Kornfield's book, The Path of the Heart. And it was the first time that I actually was getting introduced to the Buddhist and the East. I mean, I've done yoga, but this type of work. And it was fascinating to me because if I didn't know better, I would think that it had created something in me just by reading the book, which all of the Kundalini energies come up. I would, if I would have gone to my psychiatrist or someone, a friend, and they would say, oh, you're probably on a manic stage. But it was just opening me to reading and looking from that perspective. And then I used to live in Northern California, and you know that the tunnel that goes from the East Bay.
Yes.
And I was going to a workshop, actually, a meditation workshop. And then as I was driving, suddenly there was an accident in front of me, and I was driving like 80 in the morning. And there was accidents of two cars stopping like this. And it was in the middle of the tunnel. So you really couldn't go anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Alexander, it was the first time in my life that I had experienced this consciousness, this awareness that I knew exactly. And if you would have told me this, I wouldn't have believed it before. But it was this awareness of exactly how much to push on the pedals of the gas or the brake, where the person behind me wouldn't hit me, and I wouldn't hit the person in front of me. And this awareness showed up as if I knew it all and I was part of it all. And it was instant. And I didn't get into an accident. Nobody got into an accident except those two who were. And so it was, we were able to move around and not kill anybody. And after that, usually when I'm in this scenarios, I will shake afterward, or I'm, feeling like, oh my God, what happened? Anxiety, nothing. It's just like smooth. I went and drove. And I told my therapist at that point that gave me that book, I'm like, I cannot believe that just reading the book and going through these exercises, and not even telling you that I meditated every day, but even that was so powerful. So when you talk about how to bring yourself into this present moment, it really is effective. It really is amazing. Sometimes it's bringing your own creativity, but sometimes, like you were sharing, it opens you up into a whole different layers that you would have never imagined you have access to.
Yes, and your story is a fantastic example of you opening to a portal of synchronicity where you were receiving from another domain very important information that went into your feet, your nervous system, through your unconscious. Perhaps your unconscious was connected to the divine, or some people like to call it the source or the force. And you tapped right into it at a moment where most people would freak out. And because they freaked out, then the situation would get worse. But you didn't. You see, what you did is you probably took a big breath and you went right into that zone. And in that zone, I call in my book, it's the zone of creative flow. You were in a flow state. Now, of course, it was in an emergency for yourself, but famous athletes like Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, they describe Michael Jordan going right into that state that you went into. When there's 9 seconds left on the clock in the championship, they're in game 7, and there's only one shot left to take. And they all describe that they entered into this extraordinary flow state where they came out of their rational mind, their conscious mind, and they opened up to just trusting in the sensory experience of going up in the air, taking the shot, and watching the ball go all the way into the net. And that comes from someone like yourself being spiritually evolved and aware enough so that your higher self, your inner self, it had a creative choice in that moment, and you took it immediately because you're in touch with that user-friendly, creative unconscious.
Yes. You also talked about meditations to complete loss and emotions of sadness. That is so important because I do think that many times when people begin to go in, I usually say it's like an oil well, which the garbage first comes out and then you hit the oil.
Mhm.
It's a lot of times at the beginning, it's this comfort about the minute that you look inside, all of these things that are waiting to be cleared are showing themselves up to you. And it's like, clear me until you hit the oil, you hit the gold. Can you share a little bit about what you share in your book about completing with loss and emotions of sadness?
Yes. In one of my many trips to India, I asked to visit a white lotus garden. And I was absolutely shocked and stunned that the most beautiful flower in India, it grows in a mud pond. And at night, it closes up and goes to sleep. And then in the morning, it wakes up and it opens. So, there's the piece about dreams and being in touch in the mud, of course. The mud is our pain, it's our suffering. And historically, so many of the creatives I studied all had extraordinary losses worked into their life experience. What makes the difference between going through loss and then being able to be creative is a person recognizing that the depth of the wound has a core, fertile, enormous amount of creativity resides inside every loss that we undergo. And so that it is really important not to try to get over your loss or get through your loss or get beyond your loss. It's important to utilize your loss. And there's a story in Zen. There's 2 gardeners living in a village. And one gardener number 1, he builds a fence between his farm and his next door neighbor's farm. And he has a whole bunch of horses. So he takes all his manure and he starts shoveling it over into the flower and the vegetable garden of farmer number 2. And to his surprise and delight, the farmer number 2 never says anything to him about him dumping all of his horse manure into his garden. A year goes by, and he sees that his plants in his garden, they're all really kind of small, little tomatoes, little cucumbers, little squashes, etc. And flowers are not all that rich. He climbs up, looks over the fence, and he sees these gigantic pumpkins and squashes and watermelons and corn stalks. And he realizes gardener number 2 has taken all of the fertilizer that gardener number 1 thinks is just get rid of it, throw it away, which is loss. And he utilizes it to make the richest garden in the village. So it's so important and essential that when you undergo a loss, I tell all of my patients in psychotherapy is there's always a silver lining in one loss. there are many aphorisms to use, like if the divine mixes you a whole bunch of lemons, or leaves you a whole bunch of lemons, mix them together, make lemonade. When the divine closes one window, she opens another. Pain and suffering, when it comes to the creative process, it's difficult to create, and this is from my interviews. Most people in all the research that I did supports this. It's not the lost state where you create from. Usually you're depressed, you're sad, you're in grief. It's the transition state. So we don't really create. There's a lot of mythic lore that great creatives create out of their depression and their sadness. They utilize it, but the state that they create out of is called the transitionary state. It's when they're actually coming out of it. And the late great poet, songwriter Leonard Cohen, who I happen to have the unique opportunity to meet with several times, he said, depression was the sea of sadness and loss that I swam in. However, I created once upon the shore. I created once upon arriving at the shore, meaning embrace the ocean that you're swimming in, whatever it is. And we all do swim in a lot of pain and loss, but look for the transition state. Know the transition state is coming. No matter how bad one's pain and suffering is, it always shifts. In the same way, when it's raining and it's cloudy, eventually the sun comes out.
Everyone, Dr. Ronald Alexander, Core Creativity, the mindful way to unlock your creative self. Dr. Alexander, in 1 minute, is there anything we haven't shared that you really want everybody to know?
Just that it's really important, and I've found it personally in my own life. I've obtained so much richness and so much direct access to my own creative unconscious by sitting quietly, minimally 5 minutes a day, but I like to sit 20 minutes up to 40 minutes once or twice a day. That I feel, and it doesn't have to be formal meditation. It can be Christian contemplative prayer. It can be Islamic prayer. Is to take time to mine into the richness of that sacred, quiet time each and every day, and to create and go forth from that.
Beautiful. Everyone go to corecreativity.com to not only get the book, but they can also get the book in Amazon, right?
Yeah. Amazon. You can get hardcover or Kindle.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for spending
Thank you, Doctor.
with me.
Thank you, Doctor. It was a pleasure.
And for everyone who's out there, create an amazing life for yourself and everyone around you. And until next week, bye-bye.